I'm Mark Anthony, so I'll be talking to you about public transportation. So according to the last census, there are 9.8 million people living in the Los Angeles area alone, making it one of the most populated cities in the country, second only to New York. So unfortunately, with all these people in the city, as of right now, very few of them rely on a system of transportation that, unlike New York, here in LA we just don't have. That system is public transit, and public transit reduces traffic, it cuts costs for the consumer, and it provides the opportunity to help the environment. For this reason, I claim it would be more advantageous for Southern California, specifically the LA area, to increasingly rely on public transit. So just to give you some background, in the middle of the 20th century, Los Angeles was well on its way to matching New York's system of mass transit, with transportation networks ranging from downtown to the San Fernando Valley and as far as San Bernardino. In fact, the first transportation authority, Pacific Electric Railroad, operated blue buses that went everywhere. I mean, they were the first ones, and they were actually had heads up on New York. But unfortunately, in the 1960s, people started to favor the car, and consumer preferences shifted from the public to private automobile, and further shifted funding from public transit to private, to increase construction of the freeway and highway systems. Ultimately, this was a poor move for the Los Angeles area's future, which brings us to the present day. So, firstly, it would be more advantageous for Los Angeles area to further rely on public transit because it saves its residents money. Los Angeles is a very diverse community. It has a population with very high income and as well as very low income. But ultimately in Los Angeles, the average income is $27,000 a year. And according to Edmunds.com, the true cost of owning a car, which includes gas, maintenance, insurance, everything that you don't really think about at first, is roughly $15,000 a year. Whereas for a person who uses public transit, the average cost per year is about $900 a year. So essentially that means that the person who's driving a car every day for a year, they're spending about half the average person's annual income. So if someone were to make a transition from a private automobile to public transit, they would make a savings of roughly $14,000 a year, which is, I don't know about you guys, but that's a lot of tuition money. The Victoria Transportation Policy Institute, an agency itself tasked with evaluating transit agencies, noted in one of their research journals that an aging population, rising fuel costs, changing consumer preferences, and increased environmental concerns are shifting people's travel demands from the private automobile to alternate modes of transportation, such as public transit. So essentially, we're reverting to how our preferences were before the 1960s. So, secondly, relying on public transit is not just about saving money. It would also help reduce traffic and congestion. And how many people like trying to find a parking spot here on campus? At maximum capacity of the Metro local lines, the buses, the Los Angeles Metropolitan Transportation Authority would be able to remove up to 226,000 cars off the road, which in essence would mean far less traffic and far fewer headaches from trying to find parking and getting around town. Additionally, these forms of transportation can be planned in order to reduce the rush of traveling, as seen in other countries' infrastructures. Transportation authorities would essentially be able to cater to the habits and needs of the people living in the area, making for a more seamless travel time. They'd be able to plan accordingly to the travel patterns of the city. So finally, Los Angeles is a center of pollution. We're ranked pretty high on that across the country compared to other cities in the country. Public transportation has the potential to help save the environment. According to the EPA, the average car produces roughly 16,000 pounds of carbon dioxide per year and 854 pounds of carbon monoxide each year. So they produce significant amounts of pollution. Additionally, according to the Congressional Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure, they say that were we to cut down 90% of our oil consumption, we'd save up to 550 million barrels of crude oil. So aside from saving public resources, public transportation would be a medium to introduce and further save the environment by using green technologies on a mass scale not possible by the private automobile. The public transit can do this by increased implementation of hybrid vehicles and electric vehicles on mass scale. So essentially, transportation agencies would be able to take these greener vehicles and use them as a fleet of green public transit vehicles. So ultimately, mass transit is the optimal form of transportation for the Los Angeles area. If we as a community and a city want a survivable future, economically, environmentally, and infrastructurally. Thank you.
All right, you ID'd the subject. It's kind of interesting because you basically have your preview before you give us the proposition that you're going to be arguing for, so that's just a little bit backwards. You signpost the individual points while you're speaking, so it's very easy to follow for the most part, and I thought that was good. There's some historical data that is presented. We aren't really given a source on that, and there's some conclusions being drawn from that I think need to be developed a little bit more. On the other hand, there's extensive factual data about the number of cars that I thought was pretty clear. There were a couple numbers that I think are perhaps a bit problematic. The median income in the Los Angeles area, for instance, and the average cost of operating a car. If you put those two things together, that makes it sound like people basically are functioning on $7,000 a year without, because they're spending $15,000 on their car, and that makes no intuitive sense. I don't know how the statistics were acquired, and so I think it needs to be looked at a little bit more closely. I understand the impact that you're talking about, that there's an economic consequence of doing that, and I think that that's a valid point to make, but I think we need to have a little bit more information about that $15,000 estimate. The issue about the pollutants, for instance, you've got some statistics on that also. There is one number here that you present that seems a little odd to me. You make this claim that says if we cut 90% of our oil consumption, and I didn't have any information that suggested that we would be able to do that even if we had the biggest mass transit in the history of the universe, that we would be able to get down to 90% of what we're using, 90% less than what we're using now. So I think that that's an awfully big inference to be making. I thought you did a very nice job speaking to the audience and presenting things, and most of the time you're citing your information very consistently. All right, thank you.